We're going to go to the other side of the world. Well, not really. We're going to go to the president of Argentina, who was in Davos. Look, he says the West is in trouble. That's according, of course, to the new Argentinian president, Javier Milei. I think I pronounced that right, Milei, who spoke out at this World Economic Forum in Davos, which obviously lots of us have mixed views about. He said that the world should turn to unfettered capitalism rather than become socialists. Let's take a quick listen.
Today, I'm here to tell you that the Western world is in danger. And it is endangered because those who are supposed to have to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty. Unfortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-meaning individuals willing to help others, and others motivated by the wish to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We're here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world. Rather, they are the root cause.
Now, I know most political speeches are entirely boring. Let's face it, I've done quite enough of them myself. But he went to the heart of capitalism, where the guilt trip is about how, having spent years making loads of money from loads of different ways, many of which some of us wouldn't approve, they have this collective guilt trip to say how to make the world better, which has led to huge interventions by government across the world, never before seen, really, even under communism, some would argue. Socialism is no longer any more about do we nationalise something or not, because socialism, he argues, is taking place because of the huge powers of intervention, taxation, bureaucracy, regulation, that the governments are effectively controlling many of the liberties we have and the businesses and the business environment. He said, Javier Milei's Davos speech, warning that we are sleepwalking into socialism in the West, that governments in the West are doing more harm than good. Oh, agree with all of that. And he says, and actually we undervalue the achievements of capitalism, which, by the way, capitalism really kind of started in about 1800, and it changed from about 5%, 95% of the world being in poverty, to about 7% of the world being in poverty. And I'm talking about poverty, not relative poverty that we hear lots of complaining about in the West. However, on the other hand, as we'll talk about later, he seemed to think that the sovereignty of the Falklands was up for negotiation. So, do you agree the Falklands is up for negotiation? 0344 499 1000. And I should be asking you, do you agree that the West has effectively already turned to socialism? Or, as the president of Argentina says, is sleepwalking to socialism? Share your views with me. Tweet me at Nick Bois or at talkTV. Or, of course, dial 0344 499 1000. And don't forget, I'm still looking for that silver bullet that can save the Tories at the election. What's the one thing they could do that might make you vote Conservative again? But to join me talking about this speech at Davos, Justin Urquhart Stewart, good friend to Talk TV, economic commentator and chairman of the regionally investment platform. Justin, hello. I see those fantastic braces, the colourful tie. I know it's you.
I've got to be positive about it.
Yeah.
Red is a good colour.
Now look,
but it's interesting. Yes.
He goes to Davos, the heart of capitalism, okay, as I call it, the collective guilt shop, where they preach to the rest of us and so forth. I mean, he's got a point. I kept nodding when I read his speech, and I don't read many speeches. He's got a point, hasn't he? We're sleepwalking to high intervention, high taxes. This is socialism by any name.
Well, also, this is very strange coming from an Argentinian president.
Yes.
After all, most of them are, the man is being elected holding a chainsaw, for heaven's sake. Most of us thought he was 3 stops short of Dagenham, which is barking, actually, in the district line in London. They really were very surprised by this. Normally, you'd expect some arch-socialist, populist views to be coming out. Instead, this could have come straight out of, well, I think the American Economic Handbook as to what to do. Very encouraging, I have to say, because Argentina, remember, go back to 1920, which I'm pleased to say I can't remember.
Indeed.
It was 8th largest economy in the world. It's now the 44th largest economy in the world. So it's still significant, but for most people, a basket case.
We remember the stories of huge hyperinflation and so forth. But do you think that given around most of Western world, you ask anyone under about 40, certainly 35, they would describe themselves as socialist or left-leaning. In Argentina, they've had decades of socialism, and suddenly they've yearned for a libertarian, true libertarian conservative to take over.
Well, they voted for him. I wonder if they actually knew these are his policies, because what he was talking about beforehand in terms of getting rid of the central bank, aligning the currency with the dollar, and all good popular stuff. So has he changed colours completely, or we've had better understanding him? But I have to say quite encouraging, because this is a perfectly, it's a very good economy if it's allowed to run properly. Unfortunately, all its leaders, be it military or through dodgy voting, as we saw with the Perons over the past 50 years from time to time, have been incredibly unreliable and trashed the currency, trashed the economy, and it's almost a regular routine. And of course, as you just mentioned, the Falklands, as we saw with Galtieri and the last military leader, who's, when he's having some domestic problems, immediately points the arrow at the Falklands, Malvinas, and say, rally around me, rally around the flag, we'll go and invade these islands. And to try and actually make sure, give him a little bit of popularity. It didn't. Well, he lost his job. He lost the war.
He did. And indeed, we'll talk about that later with my next guest, Simon Weston, of course, a veteran from the Falklands. But some of the points he made, what I found myself cheering about this speech, and in credit to Davos, they invited him. Whether they knew what they were going to get, I don't know. But he made the case for capitalism, whereas in the rest of the world, we seem to be ready to, once again, apologise for capitalism. I found that quite refreshing, didn't you?
It is very refreshing. And if we had a politician saying that clearly and loudly, I think you'd get a lot more votes coming through, because it is, once you go through the facts and figures, as you were just highlighting there, go back to the birth of capitalism, you say, around about Napoleonic Wars, 75% of the world in poverty, and I think you said quite right, it was about 7%. You may not like all the elements of capitalism. There are some very bad examples of people who don't know how to behave individually or as corporates. But on the other hand, it has been very successful. Put that against socialism, or particularly communism, where you have dictatorial structures. And as anybody knows who actually looks at any of these countries, even when we've been doing it, governments running economies, running companies, investing in themselves are absolutely useless. And what they need to do is actually have a mechanism where you encourage private and national investment by way of tax incentives to encourage people to actually then develop more businesses and be entrepreneurial. And he mentioned that as well.
And he did mention entrepreneurial, but I just want to pick apart something here that I think he crystallised what many people have thought, but I've never been able to express it quite as well. He kicks off by saying, look, the West has unfortunately started to go along this path. That's what he calls modern socialism. And he says, I know that to many it may sound ridiculous to say that the West has turned to socialism, but it's only ridiculous if you think in terms of socialism as like nationalising or planned economies from the centre of government, nationalising states, and as we know, the sort of means of production are controlled by the state. He defines it very different as basically saying that with the tools of printing money, debt, subsidies, controlling the interest rate, price controls and regulations to correct what he calls so-called market failures, they actually control the lives of millions more than any good socialist could have dreamt of in the past. I mean, do you agree, or is he overstating the point?
No, you're absolutely right, because you just took one figure particularly over the past 10 years, maybe 15 years actually, when our debt went from 1 trillion to now 2.7 trillion. How many noughts has that got? The answer is quite a lot. And so by applying, economic principles for capitalism, we've actually devalued the currency overall. We have actually made sure we've had the highest level debt we've ever had. And we're now spending for this year probably 110 billion on our interest on our debt, which is roughly double the size of our defence budget. I mean, that's not a very well-run economy. And where was that done by? By the government, albeit the Bank of England, through the, by the government. And therefore, if that wasn't a socialist structure, I don't know what is. What you need to do, quite rightly, and he's perfectly right to focus on this, get the individuals to get the economy going. They'll have confidence. If they have confidence, then they'll spend more, invest more.
Wasn't that Thatcherism? I mean, I'll be honest, she inspired me to take risks and go for it. Now, I never became a multi-billionaire, you know, or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is, she inspired me. Have a go, basically, and don't be fear of failure.
Absolutely. I have to say she inspired me as well. Now, that doesn't mean she was the perfect angel, but there were a lot of things that weren't right.
I'm sorry, I totally disagree with you there. Enough of this man. We can't have that. No, carry on, make your point.
Oh, but the issue they had with the things for the miners, quite rightly looking at what happened there, there was an industry that was dying on its feet and needed to adjust. What she wasn't so good at in terms of the other areas of the economy was actually making sure there was something there to replace it. Not inventing new industries, but again, getting the entrepreneurs out to go and do that. And you go now to areas of Sheffield and the old coal mining areas there, and you'll find some fantastic businesses, often around the universities and the technology areas. And there's one line I remember actually up in Mansfield. I was giving boring people stupid about the economy, talking to a group of people who are entrepreneurs, average age 25 to 30. And I said, look, it must be awful for you when the mines close. And nearly all of them turned around and said, what do you mean it's awful? If it was still there, we'd be down those mines.
Well, it's absolutely aspiration, the entrepreneur. Justin, as ever, a tour de force whenever I talk to you, and I suspect we'll be hearing a lot more of this Argentinian president. Thank you very much indeed. Justin Urquhart Stewart, economic commentator, as you well know, chairman of the Regionally Investment Platform. It was refreshing, wasn't it? Now, I'm sure you haven't read the speech, but there was a man making the case for entrepreneurs and capitalism. Wouldn't that be good if we had a bit more of that here, that punchy stand-up for something that actually has worked over the last 200 years with the odd hiccup or two?